We are very close to our goal of 1,000 subscribers, but I still need your support. Please don't forget to take a second and subscribe to my channel. The security cameras in downtown Minneapolis caught their first glimpse of Alan Brewer at 6:42 a.m. on January 23, 2009. It was 23 degrees below zero, the kind of punishing cold that made the air itself feel brittle, and most of the city's workforce had retreated underground into the labyrinth of enclosed walkways and skyways that connected office towers like veins beneath the frozen streets. Alan's figure appeared on the grainy feed from camera 17B, entering the East Skyway from the 5th Street parking garage, coffee cup in one hand, briefcase in the other. His breath fogged the lens for a moment as he passed, a faint cloud swallowed by the hum of fluorescent light. Then, 73 seconds later, he was gone. The next camera down the corridor, 17C, should have captured him exiting toward the IDS Center, but the feed showed only an empty passage glimmering with condensation from the city's heating vents. No one saw him again. Alan Brewer was 34 years old, a senior accountant for Norleen Insurance Group, known among his colleagues for punctuality, pressed shirts, and an aversion to small talk. He lived alone in a one-bedroom apartment overlooking the Mississippi River, the kind of modern building where the heat was reliable and the neighbors anonymous. Every morning he left at precisely 6:25, parked in the 5th Street garage, and walked through the Skyway system to his office 2 blocks north. On January 23rd, he followed the same route he had for 5 years, wearing his gray wool coat, black gloves, and carrying the same worn leather briefcase his father had given him after college. The only deviation was a detour to the ground floor coffee kiosk where the barista, a college sophomore named Claire Littleton, remembered him ordering a medium dark roast with 1 sugar. He had smiled, which was unusual, and said something about finally finishing the year-end reports. When investigators later reviewed the timestamp on the security footage, they confirmed the exchange at 6:38 a.m., 4 minutes before he entered the Skyway. From there, every record of his existence simply stopped. The first person to notice Alan's absence was his supervisor, Karen Delaney, a meticulous woman who ran the accounting department with the efficiency of a metronome. By 8:10, she had already sent 2 emails asking about a client ledger that Alan was supposed to deliver before their quarterly meeting. When he failed to respond, she assumed he'd been delayed by traffic or weather. By noon, concern turned to irritation. She called his cell phone 6 times, each attempt going straight to voicemail, and finally walked down to the HR office to confirm whether he'd called in sick. He hadn't. At 1:25 p.m., when his desk remained untouched, his computer still locked with the previous day's timestamp, Delaney authorized building security to check the Skyway surveillance. The request set off a chain reaction that would eventually draw in the Minneapolis Police Department's Missing Persons Unit, the city's transit authority, and the Department of Public Safety's digital forensics team. The initial review of footage seemed straightforward. Alan's keycard registered his entry at 6:41 a.m., exactly matching the first visual from camera 17B. But there was no record of exit, no badge swipe at the IDS Center, no footage of him passing the next junction or stepping into any adjoining tower. The entire sequence lasted just over a minute. It was as though he had stepped into the tunnel and evaporated. Detective Maria Cortez received the call at 2:47 p.m. She'd been with MPD for 9 years, long enough to know that most missing adults turned up within 24 hours, usually drunk, angry, or having fled some quiet domestic implosion. But the Skyway disappearance intrigued her. The system was the safest part of the city, constantly monitored, patrolled by security officers, and open only during business hours. People didn't vanish there. By 3:30 p.m., Cortez and her partner, Detective Luis Mora, were standing beneath the harsh fluorescent lights of the 5th Street corridor, their breath still visible from the drafts seeping in through the connecting doors. The floor was slick with meltwater from commuters' boots. A janitor named Robert Hensley had already mopped the area twice that morning, but nothing seemed amiss. The detectives walked the length of the corridor, timing their steps from camera 17B to 17C. It took exactly 73 seconds at a normal pace, the same gap between Alan's last appearance and the moment the camera showed only empty space. Mora tested every side door. All were locked, requiring electronic access that Alan didn't possess. The emergency stairwell at the midpoint showed no signs of tampering, and the cameras at each end confirmed that no one else had entered the corridor during that time. For the detectives, the impossibility was immediate and infuriating. People didn't disappear from locked walkways under constant surveillance, yet the evidence left no alternative explanation. Cortez requested full footage from every connected building. Over the next 48 hours, she and a team of analysts combed through 23 hours of video from 12 separate cameras covering entrances, exits, and adjacent hallways. They found dozens of commuters, delivery staff, and maintenance workers, but not Alan Brewer. His image existed only within those 73 seconds of tape. The city's IT division pulled access logs for the heating and maintenance systems, checking whether a maintenance worker might have used an unauthorized route during the time in question. Nothing. Building security confirmed that all utility panels were sealed and no alarms had been triggered. By the end of the first week, the investigation had expanded from procedural to obsessive. Local news stations ran segments dubbing it the Skyway vanishing. Comment sections filled with speculation, kidnapping, suicide, corporate cover-up, even paranormal theories that compared the case to urban legends about people stepping through time slips. Cortez ignored the noise. Her instincts told her something physical had happened, something hidden in the blind spots between cameras, in the forgotten architecture beneath the city's polished facades. She started by mapping every inch of the Skyway network. The system stretched for nearly 9 miles, weaving through downtown like a glass and steel circulatory system connecting 80 buildings. Some sections dated back to the 1960s, built in stages, renovated, sealed, reopened. Old blueprints revealed structural anomalies, sealed maintenance corridors, storage alcoves, even a few undocumented crawl spaces that predated the security upgrades of the early 2000s. Most were inaccessible without demolition. Still, Cortez insisted on physical inspection. Maintenance crews pried open panels, scanned for heat signatures, tested air currents. Nothing. Not a footprint, not a fiber, not a drop of blood. The search extended to the Mississippi River embankments, storm drains, and maintenance tunnels. The Minneapolis police divers spent 2 days cutting through ice along the river's edge, but no trace of Alan or his belongings surfaced. His bank accounts showed no activity, his car remained in the parking garage, and his apartment looked as if he'd planned to return within hours. The thermostat was set to 68 degrees, his mail unopened, his refrigerator stocked. A library book sat on the coffee table, due the following Tuesday. Neighbors described him as polite but distant. One, an IT contractor named Jeff Randall, mentioned hearing faint music through the wall around midnight the night before Alan vanished. Jazz, something soft and old-fashioned. He hadn't thought it unusual until detectives asked him to describe Alan's habits. The detail, trivial as it seemed, stuck with Cortez. That night, she stood in Alan's living room, the city's glow bleeding through the frosted windows, and imagined the sound of muted trumpet echoing through the walls. It felt too human, too alive, for a man who'd simply walked into the air and vanished. Detective Cortez didn't sleep much during the first month of Alan Brewer's disappearance. Her apartment overlooked Nicollet Mall, where the city's heartbeat pulsed faintly through the glass at all hours. The low rumble of snowplows, the distant thump of nightclub bass, the hollow whistle of wind through elevator shafts. She found herself waking at 3 a.m., replaying the Skyway footage frame by frame in her mind, searching for shadows that might have meant movement, reflections that might have been another person. The official investigation had stalled. By February, Brewer's case file already occupied 2 thick binders labeled Skyway Open. The department's missing persons unit had reduced active hours, and the public's attention had drifted to other tragedies, but Cortez couldn't let it go. The impossibility gnawed at her. Every theory collapsed under scrutiny. Suicide didn't explain the absence of a body or exit footage. Abduction didn't fit the sealed architecture and the single minute of missing time. Voluntary disappearance seemed absurd for a man whose life revolved around routine and precision. The only constant in the evidence was absence, a void perfectly constructed to resist explanation. In late February, an engineer from the city's Department of Public Works contacted her about maintenance records she'd requested weeks earlier. His name was Nathan Kroll, a quiet man with nicotine-stained fingers and the cautious tone of someone who'd seen bureaucratic negligence buried under layers of paperwork. He'd been reviewing blueprints of the 5th Street corridor when he noticed something odd. The construction drawings from 1982 listed a sub-level service conduit beneath the very section where Alan disappeared. According to the records, it had been sealed and decommissioned in 1997 after a gas leak. "It's not on the current maps," Kroll told her over the phone, "but it's there. Or at least it was." Cortez arranged to meet him the next morning. Snow fell steadily over the city, blanketing the streets in a layer of quiet that made every sound echo. Together, they accessed the maintenance hatch behind a locked door midway through the corridor, one of the few locations without active camera coverage. The air that seeped out was stale, dry, tinged with dust and the faint metallic tang of old wiring. Kroll descended first, his flashlight cutting through the darkness to reveal a narrow concrete passage lined with rusted conduit and obsolete ventilation pipes. The space was barely 4 feet high, stretching into shadow beneath the walkway above. It ended abruptly 20 feet in, sealed by a concrete wall that bore faint outlines of a bricked-over access door. "They probably capped it when they updated the heating lines," Kroll explained, but Cortez's light caught something else: faint scuff marks along the floor, recent enough to disturb the dust. Kneeling, she traced them with her glove. Parallel lines, spaced evenly, like the drag marks from something heavy being pulled. They led from the wall toward the ladder they'd just descended, and stopped exactly where the air vent opened into the corridor. The marks were too clean, too deliberate to have survived from 1997. She photographed everything, logged the coordinates, and ordered forensic analysis. The lab results returned inconclusive. No human material, no DNA, only traces of rubber consistent with industrial cartwheels. Still, the discovery reignited the case. For the first time, the timeline had a crack. Cortez expanded her request for construction archives, uncovering a surprising pattern. Between 1982 and 1999, 3 workers employed by the contractor that built portions of the Skyway had died under ambiguous circumstances. One fell through a maintenance shaft, another suffered cardiac arrest in an unventilated corridor, and a third was found frozen outside the IDS loading dock after reportedly losing his way in the tunnels. None of the incidents had drawn major attention, but collectively they suggested the system's underbelly was more complex than official records admitted. By March, Cortez was spending most evenings beneath the city, mapping obsolete routes with Kroll's help. They discovered that several older access tunnels had been repurposed as electrical conduits but never properly sealed, creating hidden cavities behind walls. One night, crawling through a vent barely wider than her shoulders, she found a small cavity filled with debris, discarded coffee cups, a torn maintenance uniform, and a faded Norline Insurance ID badge belonging to a man named Robert Keene, an employee who'd vanished briefly in 1994 before returning to work claiming he'd gotten lost. The badge meant nothing on its own, but it deepened the mystery. Keene had died in 2006 of natural causes. When Cortez tracked down his family, his sister recalled him being different after the disappearance, nervous, avoiding downtown, claiming that the tunnels hum at night. The phrase unsettled her more than she wanted to admit. Around the same time, Norline Insurance began quietly cooperating with police, eager to dispel rumors that one of their employees had been involved in fraud or espionage. They provided full access to Alan's work computer, which revealed nothing unusual except a series of drafts for an internal audit report labeled Project Ashgrove. The file, when decrypted, contained spreadsheets referencing minor discrepancies in the company's property insurance portfolio, abandoned commercial lots, mostly downtown, all insured well above their assessed values. Cortez cross-referenced the addresses and froze when she recognized one, 516 5th Street South, the building directly above the corridor where Alan disappeared. The property had been listed as vacant for over a decade, owned by a holding company with no public records. When she and Maura obtained a search warrant, the building's interior was a time capsule from the 1990s. Dusty cubicles, unplugged copiers, calendars frozen in July 1998, yet someone had been inside recently. Footprints trailed through the dust, leading to a service stairwell that descended to a locked metal door. The padlock was new. Inside, they found a narrow maintenance bay connecting to the same sub-level Kroll had discovered weeks earlier. More drag marks, more silence. In a city wired with millions of watts of light and noise, this place felt like the absence of both. The next discovery came almost by accident. A transit worker named Sheila Donahue contacted Cortez after reading about the case in the Star Tribune. She claimed to have seen something strange that morning, a flicker of movement through the glass of the Skyway while driving the early maintenance shuttle. At first she'd assumed it was glare from the snow, but the detail she remembered most was color, a pale blue glow pulsing from the corridor floor, as if the lights had momentarily dimmed and then flared. Security logs showed no electrical irregularities. Yet when technicians inspected the wiring, they found evidence of a brief power surge at 6:43 a.m., the exact minute Alan vanished. The surge originated not from the building grid but from a feedback loop in the corridor's environmental control system, an old unit still connected to the sealed sublevel. Cortez couldn't explain how a sealed conduit could generate power, but it convinced her the physical space of the Skyway concealed something more than forgotten infrastructure. Over the following weeks, she and Kroll conducted night inspections after official hours, documenting temperature fluctuations and electromagnetic readings. Twice they recorded sudden drops of 8 degrees within seconds, localized in the section between cameras 17B and 17C. The air there always felt thicker, heavier, carrying a faint hum that seemed to resonate through the metal beams overhead. Kroll joked that it was just the city breathing, but his voice lacked conviction. The case file grew thicker, filled with data that proved nothing but hinted at everything. By April, public interest flared again when a local podcaster released a 3-part series titled The Skyway Ghost, Minneapolis's Locked Room Mystery. The phrase stuck. For weeks, commuters avoided the 5th Street corridor, preferring to brave the cold above ground rather than walk through the place where a man had stepped out of reality. The city eventually installed brighter LED lights and additional cameras, a gesture more symbolic than effective. Cortez hated the nickname. Ghosts implied myth, and she was hunting a man, someone living, breathing, who understood those tunnels better than anyone. Her conviction found fragile reinforcement one evening when digital forensics flagged a security anomaly from Alan's old keycard. At 11:16 p.m. on April 8th, more than 2 months after his disappearance, the system registered a single ping, an attempted access at the 5th Street corridor's auxiliary panel. The physical card had never been found, and keycards couldn't be cloned without internal data encryption. Yet the log was real. The attempt failed, but its signal came from within the closed system, meaning someone inside had triggered it. Mora believed it was a glitch. Cortez wasn't so sure. They pulled the feed again. Cameras showed nothing but empty halls, the hum of fluorescent light, the steady swirl of condensation against glass. Then, as the seconds ticked past 11:16, a faint distortion rippled across the frame, a vertical shimmer, like heat mirage. The footage degraded for exactly 2 seconds before returning to normal. It was the same timestamp as the card ping. Cortez replayed the footage 100 times, slowing it frame by frame, until she could almost convince herself that the shimmer contained a shape, tall, human, blurred by motion. When she enhanced the image, the pixels arranged themselves into suggestion rather than certainty. But one feature stood out, a brief glint of light at waist level, roughly the height of a metallic object being carried. A coffee cup, perhaps, or a briefcase. The report she filed that night was clinical, factual, free of interpretation. But in her private notes, written at 3:07 a.m., she wrote one sentence beneath the timestamp: "He's still in there." By the time spring reached Minneapolis, the snow along Hennepin Avenue had melted into gray slush streaked with road salt, and the city's skyline glittered like glass teeth against pale sunlight. But inside the 5th Street corridor, it was still winter. The air retained a chill that never lifted, a residual cold that defied the building's climate controls. Detective Cortez began to notice the way people hurried through that stretch. Shoulders tense, conversations dying mid-sentence, eyes fixed straight ahead as though contact with the glass walls might reveal something they didn't want to see. Even janitorial staff avoided the corridor after dark. The security officers called it superstition. Yet their shift logs told another story. 3 separate reports of motion sensors tripping between 11 p.m. and 1 a.m., always followed by electrical interference on the cameras. The anomalies were consistent, measurable, and absolutely impossible. Cortez spent those hours inside the Skyway herself, standing beneath the cameras, stopwatch in hand, counting the seconds until the hum returned. At 11:16 p.m., almost to the minute, the lights flickered. Not a full outage, just a soft dip, as though something invisible had drawn power from the circuit. She heard it then, a faint clicking behind the wall, like footsteps echoing from inside the steel. Mora dismissed it as thermal expansion. Kroll blamed ancient wiring, but Cortez knew sound, the way it carries through metal. That clicking had cadence, hesitation, almost rhythm. 2 steps, pause. 2 steps. Human. The forensic lab analyzed the original camera distortion and found that the signal degradation originated not from the digital feed but from electromagnetic interference, localized between the 2 camera housings. To produce that effect, something had to emit a strong, narrow-band frequency from within the corridor itself. Equipment tests ruled out every plausible source, yet the interference kept recurring at the exact same timestamp each night, as if the building were replaying a moment in time. Cortez began logging every fluctuation in a spiral notebook, noting temperature, humidity, even air pressure. The numbers formed a pattern. The dips clustered around a repeating 48-hour cycle. Whatever energy pulsed through that space, it had rhythm, almost like breathing. On April 17th, a janitor named Marcus Webb reported finding something unusual in the maintenance intake vent at the base of the north wall, half buried in dust and lint, small enough to fit in his palm. It was a key fob, scratched but intact, engraved with the logo of Norleen Insurance Group. Forensics confirmed what Cortez already suspected. It belonged to Alan Brewer. But the discovery made no sense. The vent's exterior grate had been sealed with screws untouched since installation, and the air filter inside was dated February 2nd, 10 days after Brewer vanished. That meant someone had removed and replaced the grate after the disappearance, without triggering the motion sensors. The key fob contained an RFID chip identical to the one in Alan's missing badge. When technicians scanned it, the system logged a new access event, time-stamped at the exact moment they powered the reader. Alan's ID was still active inside the network, as if waiting to be recognized. The discovery gave Cortez leverage to reopen the case formally. She requisitioned thermal imaging equipment and arranged an after-hours sweep of the corridor with the building's security contractor. At 12:03 a.m., the cameras recorded a faint heat bloom emanating from the sub-level conduit directly beneath the floor, lasting 7 seconds before fading. The bloom's shape was roughly human-sized. Kroll, who monitored the instruments, whispered, "It's residual heat from the wiring." But when Cortez touched the metal panel underfoot, it felt cold enough to burn skin. Her instinct told her that the sealed chamber beneath the corridor held the key. City engineers refused to authorize demolition, citing structural risk. So she found a workaround. Using a maintenance blueprint from 1982, she located a secondary access point, a capped drainage line connecting to the old conduit system beneath the adjacent parking garage. With Kroll's reluctant help, she descended through the hatch one Friday night, armed with headlamps and a portable camera. The air was thick with the sour scent of rust and stagnant water. Frost clung to the concrete walls like veins. They crawled 20 feet before the passage widened into a small chamber. Inside, amid dust and fragments of insulation, lay a single object, a black leather briefcase. Its clasp was broken, the edges crusted with mineral deposits from condensation, but inside the lining was perfectly dry. The initials AB were embossed in fading gold. Cortez unlatched it with gloved hands. The contents were ordinary: tax forms, receipts, a stapled audit draft labeled Ashgrove. But one item stood out: a pocket digital recorder, the kind accountants used for notes. The batteries were corroded, yet the internal memory remained intact. Forensics technicians recovered 3 audio files, all recorded on January 23rd, the morning Alan vanished. The first was routine, dictation about expense reports. The second contained only ambient noise, footsteps, the echo of distant ventilation, and faintly, Alan's voice murmuring something unintelligible. The third lasted 22 seconds. It began with the rhythmic click of shoes on tile, followed by a low mechanical hum that grew louder until it distorted the microphone. Then faintly Alan's voice, "Hello? Is someone—" The recording ended in static. For Cortez, it was both proof and nightmare. The timestamp matched 6:43 a.m., the precise minute the cameras lost him. Audio analysis identified the background hum as a 60 Hz resonance inconsistent with standard HVAC frequencies. Whatever generated it was not part of the building's infrastructure. The lab's acoustic engineer noted a brief subsonic fluctuation at the end of the file. the kind produced when air pressure changes abruptly, as in a door sealing. The implication was chilling. Alan had spoken his last words inside a space that had closed behind him. News of the recording leaked within days, igniting a fresh wave of media frenzy. Headlines dubbed it the voice from the walls. Talk shows replayed the static as evidence of the supernatural. Cortez refused interviews. She spent nights in her car near the corridor, watching the reflected light on the glass until dawn blurred the edges of the skyline. Each morning she wrote new hypotheses in her notebook and crossed them out by noon. Every explanation, abduction, structural collapse, deliberate disappearance, failed under the weight of the evidence. The only conclusion she couldn't disprove was the one that terrified her most, that the space itself had swallowed him. In early May, Kroll revealed another detail from the archives. During renovation in 1997, engineers had installed an experimental heat exchange system beneath that section of the Skyway, a prototype developed by a short-lived startup called Polaris Thermal Solutions. The company folded after a fire destroyed its test lab, and the system had supposedly been deactivated. But schematics showed wiring still connected to the main grid. When Cortez tracked down Polaris's surviving founder, an electrical engineer named Dr. Vernon Lane, he seemed startled to hear the name. Over the phone, his voice trembled as he explained that the prototype used magnetic induction to redistribute heat across closed circuits, a design later banned for creating localized electromagnetic fields capable of disrupting electronics. "You're telling me that thing's still powered?" he asked. "It should have been dismantled years ago." The following evening, technicians cut power to the corridor for maintenance. At 11:16 p.m., precisely the usual time of the disturbances, the sensors registered nothing. No flicker, no interference. The building exhaled silence. But the next night, when the power returned, the cameras captured something new. A blur of motion, faint but undeniable, crossing from left to right near the midpoint of the hall. For 2 frames, less than a tenth of a second, the shape resolved into a silhouette, tall, coat-clad, holding a rectangular object at his side. Then gone. Forensic enhancement produced a grainy still. When Cortez printed it, the outline of the briefcase was unmistakable. She stared at the image for hours, the hum of the evidence room fluorescent light echoing in her ears. The city outside carried on, bars closing, buses sighing through intersections, snow falling again after weeks of reprieve. But for her, time had collapsed into that corridor. 73 seconds stretched across eternity. She could feel it each time she walked the passage, the way sound dulled halfway through, the way her reflection lagged a fraction of a second behind the movement of her head. In her report dated May 9th, Cortez recommended full deconstruction of the 5th Street Skyway section and comprehensive forensic excavation of the sublevel. The city denied the request, citing cost and risk to commuter infrastructure. The corridor remained open. People still crossed it daily, some slowing unconsciously near the midpoint, some glancing toward the walls where Alan Brewer had last been seen. That weekend, a tourist recorded a short video while walking through the Skyway during a snowstorm. In the reflection of the glass just before the camera pans away, a faint figure can be seen walking parallel outside the window, perfectly matching the tourist's pace despite the blizzard obscuring the streets below. Investigators confirmed that no one could have been outside at that elevation. The walkway stood 30 feet above ground. When Cortez viewed the footage, her throat tightened. The figure's outline shimmered briefly before dissolving into falling snow, leaving only the city's faint pulse in the background audio, the same 60 Hz hum captured on Alan's recorder. By June, Minneapolis shimmered beneath a humid haze that made the streets smell of thawed asphalt and diesel, but in the 5th Street corridor the air still carried winter. The maintenance logs now listed unexplained condensation on interior glass despite ambient temperatures above 70 degrees. Condensation required a cold source, and engineers couldn't find one. Cortez had stopped logging anomalies. She simply lived with them. Her notebook was filled with erratic scribbles, timestamps, humidity readings, sketches of the corridor's geometry, as if understanding its angles might explain its hunger. She hadn't taken a day off in 87 days. Internal Affairs warned her to rest. Her captain reassigned Mora to a narcotics task force and left her nominally in charge of the Brewer case. Officially, it was still a missing person file. Unofficially, it had become a quiet obsession whispered about in precinct hallways as the detective who saw ghosts in the Skyway. The city hired an independent consultant from the National Institute for Structural Safety, a federal engineer named Dr. Elise Armitage, to evaluate Cortez's claim that a mechanical malfunction beneath the corridor posed danger to commuters. Armitage arrived in late June, a compact woman with gray hair and the steady patience of someone used to diffusing local panic. She reviewed the files, the photographs, the still frame of the silhouette. "Your cameras caught a feedback artifact," she told Cortez, but her tone was gentle, not dismissive. Together they descended once more into the sealed sublevel, this time with a full survey team carrying ground-penetrating radar and thermal sensors. The radar displayed a curious void behind the concrete wall, an irregular cavity roughly 7 feet wide, 8 feet high, extending beyond mapped boundaries. It wasn't natural. The edges were too clean. Armitage frowned at the readout. "Looks like a forgotten access chamber," she said. "Could be anything. Old electrical vault, storage." She recommended coring a small hole for inspection. The city granted permission reluctantly. On July 3rd, workers drilled through 12 inches of reinforced concrete. The moment the bit breached the inner chamber, a gust of air hissed outward, colder than expected, carrying a faint metallic odor that reminded Cortez of pennies and snow. When a fiber optic camera snaked through the hole, the monitor flickered with static before stabilizing on a narrow room lined with corroded panels and a floor covered in frost. At the center lay something dark and collapsed. For a heartbeat, everyone thought it was machinery. Then the shape resolved into fabric, cloth pressed flat against the frozen floor. The feed cut out abruptly as the camera's circuits fried from static discharge. The chamber was officially classified as hazardous, sealed until containment teams could assess electrical risk. But Cortez couldn't wait. That night she returned alone, prying open the coring aperture with a crowbar until the hole widened enough for her to slip through. The temperature dropped instantly, biting through her coat. Her flashlight beam caught frost glittering like ground glass across the walls. The air felt heavy, thick with static. She knelt beside the dark shape. It was a coat, gray wool, folded in on itself as if whoever wore it had simply melted away. Inside the pocket she found a laminated ID card, Norline Insurance, Alan Brewer. The plastic had fused slightly from cold, edges rimed with ice. Beneath it lay a ring of keys and a coffee loyalty punch card dated January 21st. No body, no bones, no blood. Only a thin layer of translucent residue on the floor where moisture met the metal surface, as if heat had flashed and frozen simultaneously. She photographed everything, her breath fogging the lens. Then she noticed the humming. It came from the walls, a low oscillation that vibrated through her chest, not sound but pressure. The same 60 Hz resonance from the audio recorder. Her flashlight dimmed, the beam pulsing in rhythm with the vibration. For a second, she thought she saw movement in the frost, a ripple of shadow passing across the far wall, upright, human-shaped. The hum intensified, rising to a pitch that felt inside her skull. She stumbled backward, scraped her shoulder against the concrete edge, and crawled out through the opening as her flashlight died completely. By the time she reached the corridor above, the lights were flickering again, sensors screaming error codes across the security monitors. The disturbance lasted 7 seconds, the same duration as every previous event. The discovery forced the city to acknowledge that something tangible existed behind the wall. The chamber was excavated under federal supervision in mid-July. Investigators cataloged the coat, the keys, and the residual material, which forensic chemists described as organic with silicate contamination. Composition undetermined. No skeletal remains were present. The chamber itself contained obsolete wiring connected to a defunct power regulator stamped Polaris, 1997. Armitage's team traced the cables to a transformer in the adjacent building that was somehow still live. When they cut current to the transformer, the corridor's temperature normalized for the first time in 6 months. The hum stopped. Cameras stabilized. For the first time, the space felt ordinary. The media declared the mystery solved, a tragic industrial accident. Officials claimed Alan Brewer had fallen victim to electrocution or flash freeze caused by the malfunctioning prototype. The body, they speculated, might have been destroyed by chemical reactions in the supercooled environment. Cortez knew it was a narrative designed to close a file, not explain it. None of it accounted for the reoccurring heat blooms, the interference long after Brewer's presumed death, or the fact that his keycard continued to ping the system even with the power disabled. In August, with public interest fading, she received an anonymous envelope at the precinct. No return address, only a single flash drive inside. The files contained security footage from a month earlier, time-stamped July 3rd, the night she'd entered the chamber alone. It showed the corridor from camera 17B. Cortez appeared on screen at 11:14 p.m., prying open the hatch, disappearing through the floor. The footage continued silently for 6 minutes. Then at 11:20, a second figure emerged from the opposite end of the corridor. Tall, wearing a gray coat, moving with slow deliberation. It paused near the hatch, turned its head toward the camera, and vanished mid-stride. The frame didn't cut or glitch. The pixels simply dissolved around the shape like mist. The figure's outline was identical to the silhouette captured months before. Digital analysts confirmed the file was authentic, not doctored. The security company insisted their archive had been wiped and replaced days later, making the footage impossible to retrieve without inside access. The envelope's origin remained unknown. Cortez's captain ordered her to cease independent investigation, citing mental exhaustion. She was placed on mandatory leave. The case was closed, reclassified as industrial fatality, but Cortez couldn't let go. She spent her suspension compiling every record, construction schematics, maintenance schedules, electromagnetic readings, into a private dossier. One pattern emerged. Every spike of interference aligned with power draw cycles from the city's district heating grid. The old Polaris system wasn't merely malfunctioning. It was resonating with something still active beneath downtown. Digging through Public Works archives, she discovered that multiple Skyway segments shared identical sub-level schematics, all containing sealed cavities labeled thermal control nodes, 4 in total. If the prototype network connected them, then whatever happened on 5th Street could happen anywhere in the system. In late August, while storms rolled across the Midwest, Cortez drove to the University of Minnesota's engineering library to find documentation on electromagnetic phase harmonics. She returned home after midnight to find her apartment door unlocked. Inside, nothing was stolen, but every notebook page lay spread across the floor, arranged in a spiral radiating outward from the center of the living room. At the center sat her badge and a single folded piece of paper. In careful block letters, "Stop digging," she filed a report. No fingerprints, no signs of forced entry. The captain attributed it to stress, suggested therapy, and extended her leave. The following week, one of the maintenance workers who had assisted in the chamber excavation, a man named Paul Vickers, failed to show up for his shift. His wife reported him missing after finding his cell phone vibrating endlessly on the kitchen table, a voicemail notification looping without sound. Security logs showed his keycard pinged at the 5th Street corridor entrance at 11:17 p.m. the night before. Cameras recorded nothing. The hum returned the same night. Federal authorities resealed the corridor within 48 hours, citing safety concerns. Publicly, they claimed structural reinforcement. Privately, Cortez received a call from Armitage. The engineer sounded shaken. "We cut the power again," she said. "It doesn't matter. The readings are back. There's energy down there we can't account for." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Whatever it is, it's self-sustaining." Cortez drove downtown before sunrise. Snow had begun falling again, unseasonably early, swirling under the sodium streetlights. The entrances to the 5th Street Skyway were chained and posted with warning signs. She stood outside, watching her reflection in the glass, until she noticed a second reflection beside her, faint, overlaid like double exposure. The outline of a man in a gray coat holding a briefcase. When she turned, the sidewalk was empty. By September, the city pretended to forget. Official press releases declared the 5th Street Skyway under renovation, its entrances bordered with plywood stenciled with bright orange hazard symbols, while commuters rerouted themselves through alternate corridors. But the people who worked downtown whispered still. They said you could hear a low hum at night even from outside the sealed glass. That frost gathered along the inside seams of the boards no matter how warm the weather. They said the city had buried something alive. Cortez wasn't on payroll anymore. Her suspension had turned indefinite, her badge surrendered, her emails blocked. Yet she returned to the area every evening, parking across from the IDS Center, watching the reflection of the skyline bleed into the darkened windows of the closed Skyway. She felt like she was standing before a wound that refused to heal. When the wind blew just right, she could swear she heard the faint static hiss that once marked the edges of the missing man's voice recorder. The first new disappearance came on September 12th. A temp worker named Dana Walsh, employed by the city's finance department, vanished while taking the shortcut from the 8th Street Annex to the 5th Street parking ramp. The corridor was supposedly closed, but Walsh's phone pinged from inside the restricted area at 6:42 a.m., the exact time Alan Brewer had entered 9 months earlier. Her co-workers assumed she'd quit. Her family insisted otherwise. When police finally reviewed the access logs, her keycard registered a single swipe on a disabled panel, followed by a cascading series of system errors that wiped a third of the database. Every attempt to restore the footage ended in file corruption. Federal engineers returned quietly, this time with unmarked vans and portable shielding units. Cortez watched from a cafe window as men in reflective suits unloaded equipment that looked less like construction gear and more like containment devices. One night she followed them. From the shadows of a parking structure, she saw them reopen the hatch she'd pried apart months earlier. Cables snaked into the dark. Light spilled out briefly before the door slammed shut. The next morning, the street smelled faintly of ozone, as though lightning had struck somewhere below. Unable to stay idle, Cortez contacted Dr. Armitage again. The engineer answered from Washington now, her voice strained, edges of paranoia creeping into her calm diction. "They've taken it federal," she whispered. "Department of Energy, maybe Defense. They won't say. But the readings we logged, they think it's some kind of electromagnetic resonance field. A spatial echo. It's amplifying itself through the city grid." She paused. "You were right about the other nodes. They're active." Cortez drove to each location marked on her old map. At every site, Marquette, 9th Street, the convention center, she found evidence of quiet maintenance, sealed access panels, fresh bolts, traces of frost despite late summer heat. Whatever phenomenon Polaris had birthed in 1997, it hadn't died with its founder's bankruptcy. It had spread. One evening, while reviewing old security archives she'd salvaged to a personal hard drive, Cortez noticed a pattern she'd never seen before. The interference spikes that plagued the Skyway cameras formed a repeating waveform when plotted across time. Each pulse mirrored the next, a perfect oscillation. She overlaid the waveform on an audio spectrogram of Alan's final recording and froze. The shapes matched exactly. His voice recorder hadn't merely captured the hum. It had captured the signature of the field itself, encoded like a key. If the field resonated with human electrical activity, heart rhythm, neural impulse, it could imprint on a person passing through, leaving an echo of their presence inside the electromagnetic lattice. That would explain the heat blooms, the silhouettes, the way Alan's ID kept pinging months after his disappearance. He wasn't a ghost. He was data. Cortez needed proof. She contacted Nathan Kroll again, convincing him to help her access the Skyway one last time. On September 20th, they slipped past the boarded entrance using a maintenance pass Armitage had left in her possession. The interior smelled stale, metallic. Dust motes hung suspended like ash. They set up a thermal camera, a portable EM field reader, and a simple analog tape recorder. Midnight came and went. Nothing. Then, at 12:08 a.m., the tape recorder began to hiss. The EM meter spiked violently, its needle slamming against the red. Through the viewfinder, a ripple formed down the length of the corridor, like heat shimmering above asphalt. The air temperature dropped 15 degrees in seconds. Kroll whispered, "It's oscillating." His voice cracked. Cortez raised her camera. For an instant, the ripple condensed into the outline of a man standing halfway down the hall. No face, only the impression of shoulders, arms, the suggestion of movement. He raised one hand as though to wave, then dissolved into mist. The recorder clicked off. Silence pressed against their eardrums like weight. When they reviewed the tape outside, the playback emitted a faint voice buried beneath static. A single word stretched and distorted. Cold. The next day, Kroll quit his job, leaving town without notice. Cortez stayed. She brought the evidence to the press, but no one published it. Her footage corrupted during upload, turning to black after the first 3 seconds. Friends began avoiding her calls. The city's legal department sent her a cease and desist letter warning against disseminating classified municipal data. The phrasing chilled her more than any threat. 2 weeks later, a freak cold snap hit Minneapolis. Temperatures plunged below freezing overnight. frost etching crystalline veins across windows. Power surges rolled through downtown, knocking out traffic lights. The pattern of outages formed a perfect circle centered on 5th Street. News anchors blamed overuse of the heating grid. Cortez recognized the signature, the pulse of the field expanding outward. She returned to the Skyway as snow began to fall. The boards had been removed. In their place stood transparent polycarbonate panels printed with city logos, as if nothing strange had ever happened. Inside, lights glowed steady and bright. She stepped through the door, heart pounding. The hum was gone. For a moment she believed it was over. Then her phone vibrated with a new voicemail alert from an unknown number. The audio was 22 seconds long. Static, then Alan Brewer's voice. "Hello? Is someone—" Followed by the same collapse of sound she'd heard months earlier. But this time, layered beneath, came another voice, her own, whispering the word cold. That night she dreamt of standing in the corridor, surrounded by endless reflections of herself in the glass, each slightly delayed, each mouthing different words she couldn't hear. She woke to frost blooming on the inside of her bedroom window, though the thermostat read 72. Her phone lay on the nightstand, screen black, recording indicator blinking. In the days that followed, unconfirmed reports surfaced across the city. Maintenance workers claimed their radios picked up snippets of conversation when passing certain intersections, phrases repeating out of sync with their voices. One claimed he heard his own words played back to him before he spoke them. The local paper called it mass hysteria brought on by urban legend. But those who'd walked the Skyways at night told a different story. They said sometimes if you looked into the glass at just the right angle, you could see a man walking beside you who wasn't there. He never looked back. In October, Cortez left Minneapolis. She drove north toward Duluth, following the frozen edge of the lake, but the hum followed her in the car's dashboard speakers, faint and rhythmic. She pulled over once, yanked the radio fuse, but the sound continued, soft as breathing. She began to suspect the phenomenon had imprinted on her, that in recording it she had become part of its circuit. The thought didn't frighten her anymore. She simply noted it, as she had every other anomaly, in the notebook she still carried. Her final entry before the pages ran out read, "If energy cannot be destroyed, then neither can memory. Maybe we are what the city remembers when it dreams." Weeks later, a maintenance worker inspecting the reopened 5th Street corridor found a notebook wedged behind a vent. The pages were warped with moisture, the ink blurred but legible. It ended with a single line scrawled across the margin in her handwriting. "He's not gone. None of us are." By November 2010, Minneapolis had buried the winter under civic routine. The 5th Street corridor reopened, its glass replaced. Its name quietly changed in city maps to North-South Connector B. Commuters once again flowed through at rush hour, unaware that beneath their footsteps lay a sealed vault lined with steel thicker than any bridge support. Officials said the renovations had modernized outdated electrical conduits. No one mentioned the disappearances, the frost, or the hum. But data doesn't forget. Inside the municipal server that once handled the Skyway's security feeds, a cluster of corrupted files kept recreating themselves. Each time technicians deleted them, the folder reappeared, time-stamped 06:43 a.m., the minute Alan Brewer vanished. IT supervisors finally ordered the drive physically destroyed. 3 weeks later, the same directory generated spontaneously on a backup array located in St. Paul. When printed in raw binary, the file headers contained legible fragments of words: cold, echo, 5th. The phenomenon no longer belonged to police or engineers. It had become folklore. Podcasters told the story of the man in the Skyway who appeared in reflections every February 14th. Tourists took selfies in the corridor, chasing chills that might be nothing more than drafts from misaligned vents. Bars on Hennepin ran trivia nights about Minneapolis's only digital haunting. And somewhere far north, a former detective woke to static each morning and wrote down the temperature before her eyes even opened. Detective Maria Cortez's cabin sat outside 2 Harbors, miles from the nearest cell tower. Locals knew her only as the woman who bought batteries in bulk and never came to town after dusk. Her notebooks filled 3 shelves now, each labeled by month, recording atmospheric anomalies that coincided with unexplained power fluctuations across the state grid. She wasn't chasing ghosts anymore. She was tracking a waveform. In late January 2011, a snowstorm the Weather Service called the Polar Crown blanketed the entire Midwest. For 48 hours, satellite communications dropped sporadically. When systems returned, a single data packet arrived simultaneously at multiple state servers. An audio file, 22 seconds long. Analysts traced it to no origin. It was the same file recovered from Alan Brewer's recorder, only clearer. Now a second voice followed his, a woman saying, "Step back." Federal technicians dismissed it as a hoax until metadata revealed that the file had been last modified exactly 1 second into the future of its download timestamp. No forensic tool could replicate the anomaly. The Department of Energy quietly contacted Armitage, recalling her to consult. She agreed on one condition, that they bring Cortez. Cortez arrived in Minneapolis under a name borrowed from an expired badge. The command center occupied an underground room beneath City Hall, all concrete and server racks humming like a hive. On the central monitor, oscillographs scrolled continuously, spikes of electromagnetic activity forming symmetrical arches. Armitage gestured toward them. "It's expanding again," she said. "The resonance originates from the old Polaris nodes. Each one is syncing with the district heating grid. If the cycle peaks, every conductive surface downtown becomes part of the circuit. What happens then?" Cortez asked. "Think of a tuning fork placed against the whole city. The countdown to the next synchronization, 43 hours. Enough time, perhaps, to cut the grid. But the mayor refused. Too costly, too disruptive. So they worked inside the limitation. Armitage proposed creating a counterwave, a recorded inverse frequency broadcast through the same lines. The only available sample with the exact phase characteristics was the original 22-second tape. Alan Brewer's last words would cancel the field that had swallowed him. Cortez stared at the waveform, its peaks like a heartbeat frozen on screen. "Or," she said softly, "it completes it." At 2 a.m. February 14th, crews installed dampening coils along the 5th Street Skyway. Outside, snow fell thick and soundless. Inside, generators hummed as technicians synchronized equipment. Cortez insisted on standing in the corridor itself, radio in hand. She wore a gray maintenance coat borrowed from storage, the same cut as the one she'd seen in the footage. She told Armitage it was to minimize reflection glare. Both knew it was something else, an attempt to meet the city halfway. At 6:42 a.m., the hum began. Sensors spiked. The air turned crystalline, vapor freezing mid-swirl. Static bled through headsets. "Initiate counterwave," Armitage ordered. The speakers activated. Alan Brewer's voice filled the corridor. "Hello? Is someone—" Halfway through the sentence, the lights blew out. Electric blue rippled along the glass like veins. Technicians screamed over radios, reporting simultaneous field spikes across every node. Then silence, followed by a sound like inhalation. Cortez's last transmission came through the static. "Tell them it wasn't an echo." The feed cut. When power returned 30 seconds later, the corridor stood empty. Cortez was gone. Her radio lay on the floor, casing frosted. Sensors recorded one last surge of electromagnetic flux collapsing inward to a single point, directly where she had stood. Then the readings flatlined. The counterwave project ended, officially deemed successful. Field neutralized, grid stabilized, incident contained. Unofficially, everyone who had been present that morning signed lifetime NDAs. Armitage resigned 2 weeks later. Spring came early that year. Commuters noticed the corridor seemed brighter, reflections clearer. On certain mornings, if you passed through exactly at 6:43 a.m., the glass held a double image for a heartbeat longer than physics allowed. Maintenance crews reported faint handprints appearing overnight, perfectly symmetrical on both sides of the pane, as though two people had pressed palms through from opposite worlds. Years passed. The case of Alan Brewer remained officially closed, his death ruled an accident. The Norlene insurance office replaced his cubicle, repainted, moved on. But once a year, on February 14th, the Skyway's temperature dropped inexplicably for 22 seconds. Security monitors caught a faint shimmer moving through, sometimes one figure, sometimes two, walking side by side. Postscript, extract from the City of Minneapolis Structural Safety Report, archived 2023. Residual energy readings persist within a localized corridor spanning 5th Street to Marquette. Electromagnetic fluctuations coincide annually with date 02/14, duration 00/00/2022. Source undetermined. Recommend continued monitoring. Beneath the printed signature of a junior engineer, A handwritten note in blue ink reads, "She kept her promise." It's quieter now. Epilogue: The recovered tape. In 2024, a tech repair volunteer restoring obsolete city servers stumbled upon an unmarked DAT cassette mislabeled Heat Exchange Logs. The audio inside lasts 22 seconds. It begins with footsteps, then Brewer's voice, then silence, followed by a whisper not present in any previous version. "Maria." Step back. Spectrographic analysis shows the two voices form a perfect mirror waveform, each canceling the other's frequencies until the track resolves to pure white noise. Forensic technicians call it coincidence. Listeners describe hearing a faint breath at the end, the sound of someone exhaling into the cold. End of file. The Skyway Ghost, complete narrative.